Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. The weird show where each and every week we just look at a different album and generate some form of discussion about it, whatnot, yada yada yada. So in today's episode, of course, a return to the randomizer with a look at an artist that we have actually previously explored on this channel before. So in our video for the just beautiful album Everything Perfect Is Already Here by Claire Rousay, we had a recommendation from channel supporter M. Lamberg, who mentioned this very album as one that had been resonating with them at that particular time. So, added it to the randomizer, and a year later, here we are, diving into it finally. And I have to say, after now having heard this album, though, properly, I can see why this is a particularly resonating album experience for Lamberg. That just makes a lot of sense to me, because it is one that resonated with me as well. One of the things I adored about Everything Perfect Is Already Here was its ability to just capture this incredibly wistful melancholy existentialism presented to us in this sort of abstract instrumental music collage type thing. And listening to this, it feels like a further dive into the same themes and concepts almost, although perhaps showcased to us in this incredibly vulnerable and intimate musical experience. Quite excited to talk about this one today, so without further ado, I present Sometimes I Feel Like I Have No Friends by Claire Rousay. So, we introduced Claire Rousay in our previous video, so if you'd like to know a little bit more about her, by all means go check that one out. So today we're of course looking at the fascinating digital-only release from Rousay, Sometimes I Feel Like I Have No Friends, which was released on December 28, 2021, and was commissioned, premiered, and released by Rotterdam, an institute for avant-garde recreation. And so, from my understanding, Sometimes I Feel Like I Have No Friends, or No Friends as it's sometimes known as, is an experimental composition from Rousay that's seen its way into a number of her live performances over the years, including the very same one I used to open up our last video on Claire Rousay, so kind of used it in the wrong context, but, well, you live and learn. So, of course, this studio recording, though, it kind of sees the entire composition stretched out to a wonderful 28 minutes in length, interpolating so many instruments available to her during her residency at the Worm studio. It's sort of all resulting in such a wonderful abstract exploratory album that traverses such a journey into the very mind of Rousay as she ponders the very notions of friendship in a beautifully tragic and touching way, combining it with so many instruments, sound palettes, and genres as well that it traverses over the course of the runtime. Phenomenal composition in my book, so let's discuss it, shall we? So, this release, roughly 30-minute composition from Rousay, feels very much like an exploration of that sort of ambient audio collage style we dived into on her album Everything Perfect Is Already Here, of course. And this one, it opens up with peculiar drones field recordings, and it immediately dominates the scene, you know, as you get this twinkling of the peculiar lower end piano notes almost, that are ever so slightly almost atonal almost, playing this very faint melody, you know, and it feels like it's slowly guided into the everyday world itself, as you just get the sounds of the world, you know, just buzzing around Claire Rousay, you know, as she just wanders, you know, almost like she's just walking down the street as music plays from afar, maybe in the back of her own mind perhaps. And there's something kind of melancholy about the entire composition as it all begins, but it soon becomes this incredibly existential journey into Rousay's own thinking, as she starts to question to herself, seemingly, what friendship means as an abstract concept, you know? and the very same dialogue used to open up the previous video. You know, this entire monologue of sorts is something I find really powerful and resonating to listen to, and I just love it when she just speaks, because all I want to do is just to listen to every word she has to say here. You know, her musings and questioning on friends, you know, and what friendship means and what relationships mean, you know, it feels so incredibly personal and deep coming from her. You know, what does it mean to have best friends, you know, what does the relationship entail, how do we navigate it? You know, what do we think of it, what do they think of it, and what throws it into jeopardy almost. And to me it feels like one of those perfect little muses on the you know, on the very notion when the mind has wandered into that state of existentialism and you start to questioning just everything and anything all around you. And to me the very question she ponders, it kind of captures that sense of being just trapped in completely in your own head with your own personal existence, as your mind just goes over and over and over what people think of you, you know, what their intentions are, but amazingly what your own intentions are as well. At times it's kind of cutting, sad and deep as Rousay really delves deeply into these notions, you know, and as a listener, hearing someone echo these particular sentiments, it feels so personal and relatable, you know. It's a truly fascinating movement of the track, you know, that guides us from the opening into this incredibly grand, sweeping instrumental that then plays out towards the end. And I love how, following the audio sample, you're kind of given this incredibly bittersweet and melancholy instrumental to just carry us along, leaving us trapped in our own minds as we start to really consider the very questions that Rousay has asked herself here, you know, as our own minds then start to go over those same questions of friendship, what it means to have friends and best friends and betrayed friends, and just, you know, what we do in our relationships with people essentially. And when I hear it, you know, when I'm guided into this instrumental section, I start to become so existential myself, you know, as I consider the incredible number of relationships I've had in my life, you know, those friends I keep around me, the people who nourish my life and, you know, just make it a joy to exist essentially. Friends in the band, for example, you know, some of the most amazing people I know in my life who are incredibly supportive and understanding of all these incredibly weird little projects I try to explore essentially. With those at home perhaps, you know, people I've known all my life who have just always been there for me through everything, the thick and thin. But then, as you think of these things, your mind then starts to go over everything else as well, like, you know, those faded relationships, you know, those I was once close to, those I've hurt, those I've betrayed, you know, and it's not the most comfortable thing to think about, but of course it's all part of that, you know, weird journey of life itself essentially. And it fascinates me how this long-form abstract composition can conjure up such vivid images for me as a listener, you know, as well as having me existentially pondering these very notions and ideas that Rousay herself is exploring and, you know, pondering over in her own music. It results in something that's so oddly touching and sentimental, despite being drenched in this melancholy atmosphere. To go back to the composition though, it's a very slow-moving composition though, but there's various changes as this collage kind of interpolates so many different ideas, and it's around 12 minutes into this when you get a sudden shift in the entire environment, you know. It still places us in the ordinariness of everyday life as you get a glimpse in one of those very friendships that Rousay has been discussing, you know. An audio sample of just a simple conversation between herself and a friend. And I just love how this is just so ordinary. It's just two individuals sharing this oddly intimate moment of just human connection, you know, and expresses to us what it means to be human, you know, how, you know, these odd little moments of sharing time with the people we love and just chatting and discussing, you know. It's perhaps one of my favourite moments on this album for some reason. It just makes me consider, you know, about what's going on here, you know, which friend is this that Rousay feels is so important to share in this very existential expression of friendship itself. And when we consider the name of this track, sometimes I feel like I have no friends. Something so tragic to consider, I feel, but I'm sure it's something so many of us have felt at some point or another in our life, you know, especially when your mind gets dragged into the depths of, you know, just that murky cloudiness of, you know, depression and anxiety. You start to go over these things in your mind and you feel very isolated and alone. And you do feel like you have no friends, of course, but then these moments, the ones we kind of forget perhaps, which Rousay has captured in this little audio sample and presented to us here, these are the moments that make up the relationships, essentially, and I think it's beautiful to consider, perhaps. So yeah, an incredibly odd composition though. I mean, there's so many different movements in the entire thing as it goes to it that it's kind of difficult to really talk about the abstract of the entire thing, when it's always changing and morphing. But as it all progresses though, you do get some wonderful experimentation with just concepts and ideas, for example with field recordings themselves that make up a bulk of the focal point of this album, I feel, but so much supported by the fainter sounding instrumentals that feel so gentle and somber. I think it's a truly fascinating record from Rousay that feels so wonderfully intimate throughout its entire runtime, even when we're thrown into these rather ominous experimental moments about midway into the composition, it still retains this incredibly intimate nature, this expression of existence itself and just the sheer amazement in what it means to just exist and have these moments in our life, essentially. And I think that perhaps one of the things I adore in her music, though, her ability to just perfectly express these incredibly abstract notions and concepts of existentialism through her approach to music itself. And her existential musings, though, generally seem to be the kind of things that my own mind wanders over time and time again, essentially. And for me personally, it's the kind of music that I think makes me feel much less alone, if that makes sense, less weird and strange in how my own mind interprets the world around me, purely due to the fact that there's someone out there who is also weirded out by all the same things as me, essentially. I find that to be a very comforting thing, and it's why I find Rousay's music just so intimate, relatable and personable, of course. Like, it just really connects on this really personal level if you just kind of let it in, of course, and you relate to it. And it really works on this one, I have to say. It's truly fascinating. Of course, how can we not discuss the final moments of this album, though? So those who actually know of Rousay's music and have been keeping track of it in these recent years might know of her interest in pop music, of course, especially on the most recent release of Sentiment, but also going a bit further back with the incredibly strange collaborative experimental pop album Never Stop Texting Me with More Eaze. So on this track, the final movement of this track sees Rousay performing a little acoustic number on the guitar, but her voice is just completely drenched in auto-tune, giving it this weird, robotic, almost detached sentiment almost. It creates an incredibly odd moment to end everything on, especially in terms of the musical palette being so radically different to everything else we've heard. But there's still something warm and intimate about it, though, because it becomes this final existential musing that sees Rousay exploring the concept of friendship once more. What it is to need someone, but also what it is to be needed. And it's a little pop ditty, I think, but it's kind of beautiful how Rousay has spent, about 25 minutes building up to this point with abstract instrumentals before ending on this little weird pop song. I think it's truly fascinating. And it's a lovely way to end the whole thing on. Little jarring, but then when you let it in and just accept it for what it is, there's something so lovely about it, I have to say. So it's kind of thing, I don't know if we'll be hearing it in this video, of course. This video will end up being shorter than the actual song, but when I'll keep it as a surprise in terms of what it sounds like if you just go and check out this one, to be fair. And so, I think, overall though, this might be a new favourite composition of mine from Rousay. It features, all of that unusual experimentation of field recordings and musical layers and weaves together this incredibly strange tapestry of these existential concepts, of course, doesn't it? A recording that becomes all the more rewarding the further you dive into it, navigating through the strange and unusual, and ends up resulting in these different sounding passages that are so bittersweet and beautiful once again, despite all the differences in the various movements. And it all paints this existential picture of pondering your place in the world, and it comes across like a further continuation of those core concepts explored on Everything Perfect Is Already Here, as well as ideas explored on previous and on future releases from Rousay. I think in a weird way, it's perhaps one of the most honest culminations of everything Rousay has to offer the world of music, and results in one of the most fascinating releases in her entire career, I would say. This rather long-form experimental composition, just completely untethered and unbound from the notions of conventional genre, even within experimental music, I would argue. I can't think of much else that is as experimental sounding as this in terms of ambient sound collage, and then has a pop song at the end of it, It's, and especially pop song in this sort of experimental aesthetic, that's really weird to me, but I think it's really cool how it's been explored here. And as mentioned, it is something that Rousay has been exploring so much more on her recent album of Sentiment, so if you like that kind of thing, definitely go check that one out. It's a really peculiar album, but another fascinating existential dirge once again from her. And so, yeah, just to quickly go back to, this one and just to sum it all up kind of thing, definitely rising up amongst my favourite of Claire's ever-growing discography, and there's just, just to touch upon it again, it's just so poignant and delicate, this whole entire composition, I feel, as well as, the troubling existential musings that's transport on this unusual journey, backed up by the wonderful tapestry of field recordings, acoustic instrumentals, brief musical passages, and experimental dirges of sound exploration. It's such a collage of sounds and tones, and it all results in a listening experience that tugs on your heart, if you only decide to let it in. And I adore that, though. I love how this entire recording incorporates so many different facets of music, and just audio in general, though. Storytelling, monologues of existential dread, field recordings of the human conversations we have, in our everyday lives, audio snippets of singing songs to yourself, it seems. And this sound palette of gentle instrumentals to ambient swells to peculiar sound instances, especially in that more experimental section where it all just becomes almost tumultuous. It's just such an abstract brush across the entire canvas with an array of different colours and textures, all resulting in this overall experience that just feels so wonderfully human. And it's, like I said, what I adore about her music, though, Rousay just has this innate ability to just tap into the human experience of what it means to exist in this current day and age, but more specifically, presenting to us her own journey and her own story through all the strange and unusual instances that life throws at us, and how our minds interpret and try to make sense of it, even when it really doesn't make much sense at all, does it? And so I think with that, we'll come to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. So glad to have had the chance to discuss the wonderful music of Claire Rousay again, and I'll say, still kind of surprised that the video clip I used in the last video was the very track we're kind of looking at today. I had no idea, I'm kind of a bit of an idiot sometimes when it comes to the editing of things, but I just think it's kind of cool, that Lamberg mentioned this one, maybe because of the monologue, of course, but yeah, my bad for using it incorrectly, I guess. But another wonderful musical journey from Rousay, of course, that just offers so many facets of music, sound collage, and just abstract audio presentation. So yeah, huge thanks to M. Lamberg for the suggestion of this video, and once again a reminder that if you want to suggest something for the randomizer, then just go ahead, put it in the comments. It'll be added into the wheel. If you are lucky, it might get selected for a future video. At some point, hopefully next year though, we actually are going to be covering a huge mammoth album that the randomizer has churned out. Probably won't be, done at the end of the month kind of thing. Maybe it will though, but this is going to take a long time to cover. The commenter who suggested this probably knows exactly what I'm on about, but yeah, this is going to be another Door of Darkness type thing in terms of length and diving into. This is going to be so weird, but we'll see. But yeah, more on that in the future. So yeah, for today, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best. Take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.